Hello everybody, this is Brendan's Trains here. We're going to continue part 2 of my list in a little bit. Let me just finish my little excursion really quick and I'll be right back. See you guys later. Alright guys, let's now continue with part 2 of my top 12 retired team excursion stars list. Number 9, Canadian Pacific number 2860. This 1940-built Montreal Hudson was the first member of the last group of Royal Hudson locomotives built for the Canadian Pacific. The Royal Hudsons in the last group were numbered 2860 to 2864. All of the Royal Hudson locomotives in general were used for swift passenger service. 2860 herself was retired in 1956 after she derailed outside of Vancouver Island. Then, in 1957, after the engine was repaired, it was put back into service until 1959 when she was withdrawn from service. 2860 was on a scrap line until 1964 when she was saved by the Vancouver Railway Museum Association. The engine would stay in storage until 1970 when she was sold to Joe W. Hussey. 2860 would stay with her new owner until 1973 when she was sold to the British Columbia government. Later in the same year, 2860 was restored and fired up for the first time in 24 years. 2860 would pull her first excursion in November of 1973. She would continue pulling excursions until 1999 when the crew had discovered a few leaks in the superheater element. The story of 2860 doesn't end here though. The engine would stay in storage until 2006 when she steamed into Squamish Station for the first time since 1999. The engine would continue pulling excursions until 2011 when its fluid time expired. Today, 2860 is still owned by the British Columbia government. The government does have plans for refurbishing 2860 for operational purposes.
8. Nickel Plate Road 759. Nickel Plate Road 759 is a S2 Class 284 Berkshire built in August of 1944. She was engine 60 out of 80 to be built between 1934 and 1939. She pulled fast freight and passenger trains until 1958 when she was chosen to be the last steam locomotive to be overhauled by the Nickel Plate Road. After she went through her overhaul, she was put in storage until 1962 when the engine was sold to Steamtown National Historic Site. The engine stayed on display until the mid-60s when she was chosen by Ross Rowland for his High Iron Company excursions. 759 was finally steamed up in August of 1968 and given a test run. 759 would pull the regular High Iron Company excursions until 1969 when she was chosen to pull the Golden Spike train to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the Transcontinental Railroad. 759 had blue paint scheme with gold lining on the tender. After the event was over, 759 would run excursions until 1973. In 1973, she ran a few excursions on the D and H and was put into a D and H roundhouse for storage. Unfortunately, the D and H forgot to drain the water in the boiler, which freezed and caused damage to the locomotive's flues. Flues on a steam locomotive carry the combustion gases in the boiler. Then, the boiler boils the water and produces steam. Steamtown sued the D&H and the 759 was sidelined and was put into shops for restoration. In 1975, a test fire was put into the engine, and 2 years later, they tried a hydrostatic test which failed. Sadly, it was decided 759 would remain on display. Sadly, Steamtown has little interest of restoring the 759 into running condition. Dang, I feel bad for this Burke.
Number 7, Union Pacific Challenger, number 3985. 3985 was considered at one point the world's largest operating steam engine. The Challenger locomotives were meant to help out their older brothers called the Union Pacific Big Boys, made in 1941. 3985 was built in 1943. It ran until 1957, and then it was retired in 1962. It was put into storage with Big Boy number 4023. And then in 1975, it was put on display outside the Cheyenne passenger station. It stayed there until 1979, when a group of Union Pacific employees decided to try and restore the 3985 to running condition. It was finished in 1981 and decided to start pulling excursion trains. Unfortunately, the engine couldn't go all over the Union Pacific system since it burned coal. The engine had started a good amount of grass fires in its lifetime. So, in 1990, the 3985 decided was converted from a coal burner to an oil burner. The engine was known to dress up as two other Union Pacific steam engines, those being 3967 for the 40th anniversary of the Rocky Mountain excursion. And then, on its last leg of the trip, the 3985 was dressed up as a semi-fictional numbering system. It was briefly numbered to 3718. This is because 18 Challengers were converted to burn oil in the steam era. And if 3985 was the next one to be converted to burn oil, it would have been numbered to 3718 in the steam era. 40 years ago, 3967, another Union Pacific Challenger, pulled the excursion train, and since that engine was scrapped out, they decided to dress up 3985 as 3967. The 3985 would run until 2010, when unfortunately it had to go in for its 1472-day boiler inspection. Sadly, in January 2020, 3985 was retired. This is because in 1981, they more like repaired the engine to get back to running condition, which for a steam locomotive, you're supposed to make it look more like factory fresh condition as possible. And they learned that lesson with the Union Pacific 3985 and 844 to prove it. So now, 3985 is in the roundhouse, awaiting restoration, while Union Pacific Big Boy 4014 takes 3985's place.